Hello, everybody. We're going to give people a couple minutes to join in here. I will be right back. Okay, people are still joining, so we'll give it a minute or two, and then we will get started. Give people about 1 or 2 more minutes as I pull up all the things that I will be sharing today. Right. All right, we're going to get started, and we'll see. Other people may join along. Can everybody hear me okay? Chat, somebody just chat me. Just let me know if you can hear me. All right, great. Thank you. And nice to see everybody. And for those of you who are joining for the first time, thank you guys for coming. We're going to concentrate on websites in this tutorial. And we're going to talk a little bit about, I'm just going to real quick before I do this, I want to make sure that I can see people who are joining here. Oops, here, easy pass. All right, cool. Yeah, here we go. All right, so this tutorial is going to be reviewing different website platforms, and we are at my business. We have we're primarily a WordPress specific website company. We really only build websites on WordPress, but I'm trying to approach this from a unbiased, perspective of, there are many different tools that exist to help build first-time websites. And I wanted to go over a few different features and topics on, why somebody would pick one over the other. And probably the six, there's I would say 5 to 6 really popular platforms. And if there's any platform that I don't cover now, feel free to ask me about it at the end. I've used a lot of platforms. Some of the platforms that I'm not going to be covering are like HubSpot, and like HubSpot Builder, or like BigCommerce, or a couple of like the more premium website companies that exist. They, at this point, I don't think would be useful for any of you guys, as people who are just either starting out or just want to know the differences between an entrepreneurial website builder, and especially if you're going to be taking on a lot of the building yourself. This is really this tutorial is going to be primarily focused on what website builders exist for a small or company or an entrepreneurial company, and how scalable is it. What can you expect from like the content builder, and how useful is it in terms of like SEO, which is search engine optimization, which we'll touch on, and how much customizability do you have with it. So I think we have a good amount of people here, about 15. So thank you guys for coming. So the first one I want to focus on. So we're going to be going through Wix, Squarespace, Shopify, WordPress.com, and then also WordPress as a builder itself. And I'll explain the differences, and Webflow. And if there's any that I don't touch on, again, that you guys want me to talk through, if you've heard of another site, please let me know. So probably the most the most popular of all website platforms right now is WordPress, which makes up about 1/3 of the websites that exist today. WordPress is incredibly, so this is WordPress.com. To talk to you a little bit about like the difference between WordPress.com and WordPress as a builder or as just a platform. WordPress.com is essentially it's hosted by WordPress. You would have a WordPress.com web URL. So it would be something like, so for instance, if we were doing it, it would be like greatbigdigital.wordpress.com. And it primarily exists for very simple websites, not very much customization. It's primarily for blogs, and it doesn't really make up a lot of the websites that exist right now. What WordPress itself is, and this is, think of it as kind of like a tool to build websites, is WordPress itself is a platform that is relatively customizable. It's actually significantly customizable because it's called open source. And what open source means, and we're going to be going through the rest of these that are on this list, are relatively closed source, which basically means you don't really have access to customize it further if you know code. But what open source means is that it's completely open to developers to build on top of the platform itself, right? So this provides a humongous community out there that provide things that are plugins to build on top of this WordPress. Now, when you get started with WordPress, you need to have a host. All of the rest of these, Shopify, Wix, Webflow, Squarespace, they all provide you essentially hosting. They are their own hosts, right? So you would buy a domain, right, from somewhere like either GoDaddy, Namecheap. You could buy it from Google, and you would go to, this is really the first place you would start. You would buy a domain. So for instance, domain.com, right? You could see if it's available on something like Google. This is where I tend to buy domains, which is domains.google.com. And you can just search to see if the domain itself is available. Once a domain is available, and I already have domains in here, so you can, if you don't have a domain, you can search for new domains in this get a new domain and just type in whatever domain you want. There's plenty of platforms that exist to buy an actual domain. Once you get a domain, you would need, for WordPress, you would need to find somewhere that you could host it. So for instance, a hosting company like GoDaddy, which honestly I don't recommend, but something like Flywheel or Cloudways, there's tons of different independent WordPress hosting companies out there that are better than GoDaddy, that specifically host WordPress specific domains and platforms. So I would get you would set up a host, and then you would basically just be given a blank instance of a WordPress. Now, WordPress is not very user friendly to build with. You really kind of need to understand code itself to really customize WordPress. Now, there's different plugins that exist that help with like making it more like a visual builder. There's things like Beaver Builder. There are Visual Composer. But the more plugins you kind of put into this interface, and if you are looking for a very friendly builder, I would suggest Beaver Builder on the WordPress side. But the more, there's a lot of like clunkiness with visual builders sometimes. So you got to be careful of, and when I say clunkiness, I'm talking specifically for like site speed and for like SEO purposes. Like Google is really looking for sites that are built well. And as we kind of go through these different platforms that exist, we're going to take a look at the lens of how Google would see one of these sites that are built with one of these. So from a overall like customization standpoint, WordPress is awesome. From an SEO standpoint, it starts out being incredibly awesome, and then the more kind of plugins and bulk you add to it, the more kind of difficult it gets to rank. But a very SEO friendly visual builder is Beaver Builder on WordPress. So I would say though that out of all of these, WordPress is the hardest to work with in terms of building a website. Once you have a website that's kind of built, and there's templates that exist that make it, a little easier for you. That because it's open source, it has a lot of people build templates, and then you can buy a template from somebody, and get, a starting point that you can build content on top of. The problem with templates, again, is that there's a lot of bulk to them oftentimes, and they're not very SEO friendly sometimes. So you really want to know where that template is coming from if you're going to be doing a WordPress site. From a content management standpoint, WordPress is amazing. It's built as a blogging platform, and we'll talk more about the blogging, more on the later end of this. But from a content perspective, once you have a good WordPress site, it's very easy to build content that is really good for SEO and for Google and for people in general who want to see you updating the website and providing more content. One of the reasons it's become an incredibly powerful, someone just asked about what about Elementor. Elementor is not bad at it either. It's I would say Divi, Elementor, and Beaver Builder are all pretty good. They all have different features, but you just want to make sure that you're not bogging it down with a ton of plugins that have no purpose. So you really want to stay lean in terms of what you put onto and how the site is structured. But Elementor is not bad. In terms of UX and site structure, WordPress is really good if you set it up right. But in terms of like actually getting a website fully functional, it can be relatively difficult if you're just starting out. So let's talk about Wix. So Wix is another incredibly popular website builder. I don't know if you guys have seen commercials as much as I've seen commercials for Wix. I think it's because they tried to target me with remarketing ads. But it's incredibly they lean hard into their marketing for Wix, and Wix is a really good tool if you are just looking to get something up right away, right? It's relatively cheap. It has it's kind of like it leans very hard on being a WYSIWYG, which is basically a drag and drop platform. right? So it's incredibly user friendly in that it's, I'm just gonna make sure I have this up here. Sorry about that. Okay, great. So it's incredibly user friendly in terms of getting content up there fast. It provides you pretty much everything you need. You can buy a domain through them, I believe. You can point your domain there if you already have it. You can. It's has like a very easy to use builder. And I believe they even have e-commerce now. So, Wix, from a usability standpoint, out of all of these platforms, is probably the easiest. Now, with an easy platform, oftentimes comes incredible drawbacks when it comes to like scalability, customization, and SEO, because what happens is Wix, even though they've done a lot over over the past few years to, Wix used to be a joke when it came to SEO. It used to be so bogged down. It used to run on Flash, which is, I'm sure most of is not at all used anymore on the web. And it used to have like all of these issues with SEO. They improved that a lot. They built out their system, not using Flash anymore, but they are still widely seen as one of the worst SEO platforms that exists. So if you're trying to scale your business in terms of being found on Google, blogging, adding customizations on, getting your website to a place that's like fast and like healthy code, Wix is not great. But if you're just trying to kind of create a billboard for your company, or just a place that you can, send people to, or you just are in an emergency and need to get something up, Wix is a pretty good option in terms of, what how you can build a website relatively quickly. So I want to go real quick to Webflow. So Webflow is actually a really good bridge between something like Squarespace or Wix and uh, WordPress. So Webflow is kind of like a blend between a WordPress site, where you kind of have to know code a little bit, know what classes are, know what IDs are, and know the basics in terms of responsive websites, versus something like Wix, which is kind of all does it for you, and you're really just dragging and dropping, and you aren't really paying attention to how the site is actually coded. So the way that Webflow works is it's basically it it gives you a content management system that provides you. Oops, it's not letting me let new people into the meeting. So give me a second here. There we go. It provides you a content management system, which allows you to code without really coding. This allows you to kind of like start almost learning a little bit about how websites work. It gives you an interface where you can drag in columns and rows, and everything in on a website exists in columns and rows. That's what responsive design is really based out of. So when you're building a website, you have to think of it as a grid, and in this grid exists, content that fits into columns and rows. So when things get smaller, and when you go from a desktop experience to a mobile experience, it scales from 3 columns, which you see potentially, like for instance, we can even see it here in Webflow, what I'm looking at right now. You see this side of everything is in one column, and this side of the content and the page is in this column. So these are 2 columns. And if I were to make this smaller, this is going to stack on top of this, right? So this is, and then, this goes further down. And so like you can see here that now this one section is in 2 columns. And if I were to stack it on top of each other, this would stack on top of that. And then, depending on how small the screen is, this would end up stacking on this. So you're thinking about it as like these are all just columns and rows that are stacking on top of each other. And in something like a Wix or a Squarespace, you're not really concentrating that much on columns and rows. On Squarespace, you are a little bit, but you're not really kind of labeling what these classes are and what you want to do with the designs or anything like that. It's much more kind of just it does it for you, right? The problem with it doing it for you, like in a Wix or Squarespace environment, is that you're just creating all of these classes and IDs and code that really is starting to become very dirty in terms of what is behind the scenes to Google or to any bot that's going to be indexing it. And what happens is that with all of those, with it being super dirty, Google's like, wow, this site isn't really built well, so I'm just not gonna put it high up in search results. So Webflow is much more versatile for something like SEO, where you're actually relatively cleanly going through and labeling things strategically throughout the site, which provides a much cleaner experience. Now, what we talked about before was that, the benefit of WordPress is that it's open source. Webflow is not open source, so it really, what you're getting from it all exists within the platform itself, and it's not really customizable beyond what it gives you. So like if you want to do any type of like integration with like a customer relations management tool that's a little bit more advanced, or if you want to scale it with some custom functionality like a custom form that really is specific to your business, or you want it to do some admin elements for you, you don't really have the capability of doing that. From a design perspective, you have complete control over what the website is, and you're setting up those columns, you're setting up those rows, you're setting up transformations. So like you're setting up the animations, and there's a lot of like really cool animations that are kind of built into this, and that's what Webflow is kind of like really leaning into. It's like bells and whistle design platform. So like animations, interactions. So like when you scroll down the screen, you can see things pop in, and so there's a lot more kind of bells and whistles built into a Webflow site. It's easier to use than WordPress, but again, it's not necessarily as scalable as WordPress. When we first started our business, we built everything on Webflow, and then it became way too limited for us. So we moved to WordPress, which now is, completely customizable from our perspective, since it is open source. And also, it does have WordPress, if you're doing it right, does have SEO advantages to Webflow, because some things in like if you are using, for instance, page speed insights, which is Google's analysis on page speed, or how to fix speed issues on your website, or something like if you're using GT metrics, which is another one, which is another speed test. Oftentimes you will get back all of this back end JavaScript stuff that you need to fix for it to be like as healthy of a site as it can be. And with Webflow and Wix and Squarespace and all of these, you don't really have that many options in terms of what Squarespace and Webflow is doing in the back end that could potentially slow down your site, right? And for instance, there's no like you can't like render the server, because that's all controlled by Webflow or Squarespace. So, you're a bit limited in terms of how far you can go. If you wanted, you'll probably be able to get to like 85, 90% in Webflow on like GT metrics score in terms of like, you might have like a soft A, but you're not going to get to like an A plus because it's just, you can't customize it further than what Webflow allows you to customize it with. But it is a really useful tool. It's again harder to use than like Wix. It is a harder to use platform than a Wix or Squarespace, but that also means that you can customize it further. And that's where like finding this balance really is tricky, is because you want to, the more you can customize a platform, the harder it is for you to set it up in a way that is easy. And so you really want to, as a business owner, especially right now, kind of understand what your, MVP is, your minimal viable product, and where that's coming from. And is that Wix? It could be. Just because you're building a website right now today does not mean this has to be the final iteration of the website. When we talk to clients, we often say, okay, how can we get something up as quickly as possible for you so that you can start, making business? And even if it's not the final iteration of what that site is, and it shouldn't be, because in the digital world, it's not print, right? You are not creating something that it has to be the same forever, right? You are creating something that is supposed to adapt. And every single, month, Google is releasing a new algorithm update. Website designs are changing. In a year and a half from now, who knows, everything might just go to VR or AR, and we would need to adapt. So when you think about the, building a website, you want to understand what is the most useful right now, and set it up in a way, potentially that could be building a Wix site and then building a WordPress site in the background, or it could be building a one-page landing page on, a WordPress site and then building the rest of it out, in the background. Or it could be, getting a Shopify site if you're a e-commerce site, and then that's going to cost you some money. We'll go into Shopify in a second. That's going to cost you, a good amount of money to be on a recurring monthly plan with Shopify. But then maybe you can, in the background, invest in, building your own store through like WooCommerce or WordPress, and then to get off of that eventually. But, what you're doing is you're balancing and being informed into what all these platforms are, the uses of these platforms, and what are the drawbacks and what are the advantages, and then making an informed decision based off of what works for you right now. So let's talk about Shopify real quick. So Shopify is probably the most popular, I would say, medium level e-commerce website. And an e-commerce website basically just means you can shop online with it. Yeah, it's a store essentially, right? So Shopify is a very robust platform, and it's relatively scalable. When you start with a Shopify site, you basically get teamed up with a Shopify vendor, which you pay for, or you can try to build the store yourself if you know how to do it. It's a little bit technical, but it's possible. And it's, like I said, relatively scalable. The nice thing about Shopify is that it integrates, has it with Google Analytics really well. It has good SEO, but it is closed source. So there are, you can access a lot of the back end, but especially not on the pro version. You don't really have access to the checkout funnel to customize that very far. So just be aware that you have there's limitations in how much you can customize the experience sometimes. And the more you customize on Shopify, the more complex it gets. Everything is like from a code standpoint in Shopify language, this liquid.theme. And it's relatively technical once you kind of look under the hood. So it is more towards a like a WordPress than it is towards a like Wix or Squarespace. Now, Wix and Squarespace both have e-commerce platforms that are kind of built in that you can get for an added buck a month, but they're not very robust and they're not very SEO friendly, and they're limited to what Squarespace or Wix decides to give to you. If I were to build a store myself that has an e-commerce environment, I would either build on Shopify or I would build on WordPress WooCommerce, which is WordPress's version of a e-commerce store. The e-commerce store on WordPress, again, is completely open source. You can customize anything, but it is not as user-friendly as Shopify, which is, built for specifically easy to use shopping experiences that has like a good SEO. One of the things I personally am like, day to day in, my, the thing that I work on the most day to day is analytics and data. And Shopify has a really nice built-in Google Analytics integration that basically you can track all of your sales, where they came from, everything that's going on the product side of your business. This is very difficult to set up, or I wouldn't say very, but difficult to set up on the on a WordPress site. So know that if you're interested in understanding your users and where they're coming from and who's buying what and and where they're coming from before they get to your site, if you start advertising, Shopify is a really good site for integrating with those type of analytics. And it's SEO friendly too. It has a lot of built-in features that help with SEO. So I'm sure everybody's heard of Squarespace. Squarespace is probably like a little bit more of a like Wix's more like healthier, big brother. It's not as I would say disgusting on the back end as Wix is, but it is very limited. You can get like Squarespace Pro, which allows you to really customize it beyond it, Squarespace itself. But if you're going to go for like a Squarespace Pro, you might as well just pay someone to build like a WordPress site, because you're still relatively limited. It's like all the designs on Squarespace are somewhat old feeling, in my opinion. It's very blocky. And while you can get like, it's a nice enough landing page, most websites feel like they're made on Squarespace. Everything's in blocks. It doesn't, there's not a lot, like there's some like basic animations, but from a design standpoint, I always found the UX and the design of Squarespace sites relatively, stale, I would say. From a content perspective and a user perspective of like managing content, it's pretty easy. It's, a lot of people start out on Squarespace because of how easy it is to add and, build content out. And it does teach you a little bit more about coding than like Wix does, because it is based again on like columns and rows. And when you're adding things, it's adding things in a way that's mobile friendly, and you're not just dragging and dropping. And it's healthier in terms of SEO than a Wix site. So, if you're going to be choosing one or the other, for scalability between Wix and Squarespace, I would say Squarespace is the better scalable option. If you're choosing something from a user like design standpoint, and you really just want something that has like a much nicer design, I think Wix is a bit of a better option for that. But it's, you're trading off, the ability to scale that website at all, because, you are never going to really rank high in search results with a Wix website if there are anybody else in terms of competitors on something like WordPress or something, So, just realize kind of what you would be trading off. But WordPress Squarespace is easily updated. They have a lot of templated designs that you can choose from, and generally getting a Squarespace site up takes a week to 2 weeks versus getting up a WordPress site, which could potentially take a month to 2 months. Even with people building it in the background, WordPress sites take a while. So, and there's a very steep learning curve on WordPress as well. When I first started out, it was like I started by just learning WordPress tutorials, and I realized just how much I had to learn. And I, quickly ended up going to Webflow to build our first site, which then later we brought onto a WordPress. But there is a steep learning curve there. So that is a bit about each platform. Each platform, from a site structure standpoint and a UX standpoint, I just wanted to touch on, regardless of what website platform you are using, you want to really think about websites as a funnel, right? You want to, when it comes to laying out a website and laying out your own brand, you want to understand that it's, essentially like you're building a house, right? And when you're building a house for yourself or a store, let's say a store, you're building a store, right? You want to place the products that in a strategic way based off of who is coming to that store and what that, what you want them to do. So for instance, if you have, if your business right now has an overflow of, say, air conditioners, right? You want to place those air conditioners relatively, like if this was a store, relatively close to the entrance to get people's attention on them, right? So you want to approach websites the same way. You want to lay out content in a way that presents the content that you want them to understand as high up as possible, so that it leads them down a pathway to more content, which then leads them on a pathway to book you or get you as in a service. And so you really, when you're building a website, you want to think about the strategy in terms of where all this content lives, right? And if you're building one page, you want to make sure that on that one page, people have the ability to, one, contact you easily. They don't have to search for it, right? There's two different types of people who go to a website. There's the people who want to make a decision right away. They see something they like, they want to make a decision. And then there's the people who want to, learn more, research more before they actually contact you. You want to be able to appeal to both of these customers. One, the person who wants to reach out to you right away, you want to present the content with a strong call to action as high up as possible on the page, so that they are able to not have to find you or find a way to contact you because they might get frustrated and leave. And additionally, you want to make sure that for the people who research you, you're providing enough of a funnel for them, right? Learn more, which then presents more content, which then has just the amount of content they need to make a decision, or puts them on a pathway to making a better decision. You want that to be an easy pathway too. So whether that's a contact us or learn more, two different call to action buttons that present two different pathways for the person who wants to contact you right away, and then the person who wants to learn more. Or if it's two different audiences, making sure that you're speaking enough to both of them and you're presenting a pathway that they then can segment those two different customer types into two different types of funnels. You just want to really think about how you are presenting that content in a way that is palatable for your users. And you can ask, there are tools out there like Hotjar, which we talked about last week, that you can push a survey live on your website, which asks customers if they find information the way that in a way that's easy, or how can we improve our website. So there are definitely tools out there, but the best way to do it is just to ask random users to come onto the site and give you feedback. You do user testing, and which will help you kind of understand if the content is clear, if they're able to find how to contact you easily. So that's one thing that I wanted to mention. And another thing I wanted to mention was just making sure that let's talk about the funnel, and just making sure that your content is relevant for whoever is coming to it. Like, your business, right? But other people don't, right? So you want to make sure that the content that you're adding, and we'll talk about this more in like an SEO class, but the content that you're adding is the way that people would be thinking of it if somebody was searching for you, right? What keywords are they searching for? What do they ask Google that you want to show up for? And do you have an answer for that on your website? So for instance, if you are a construction company, right, and you want to show up for best construction companies, are you talking enough about you being a construction company on your website that Google would find that relevant to you, to the user, when they're searching that? So think about the content that you're presenting as well. Two more things about websites is, one, site speed. Okay, people, I think there's a statistic that if websites take longer than 2 seconds to load, there is a significant drop off of people leaving the site. So know that it's incredibly important for your site to load very fast. I think as there's metrics out there, I don't have them right now, that of companies, large companies, showing money, the revenue that they could potentially make from a user going to the website, losing a percentage of that revenue for every single second that a website takes to load, right? And so basically, the longer, based off of the percentage of drop off after that website load, so, or per second after they load. So when you are building a site, you want to concentrate a lot on site speed, right? And if these, one thing that you will probably want to look up after this is, the specific, there's plenty of blogs out there on specific site speed with all of these different platforms, right? So you want to really make sure that you are building a site that loads really quickly, so that you are not potentially losing tons of customers. The other thing I wanted to talk about is the importance of it being mobile friendly. Most of these platforms make it very easy to build mobile experiences. And when you're thinking about building a website, you really want to concentrate on building it from a mobile first design, right? And what that means is when you jump onto one of these, put it in mobile view first, right? A lot of these have mobile specific views that you can build the website into. And the reason that's important is I think the statistic now is that 70 to 75% of people who are looking at websites are going via their phones, right? And if you do not have a mobile first website, right, and you're just concentrating on the desktop version of the website, then you are going to be humongously missing a crowd of people that are looking for your services. They reach your website, they don't have a good mobile experience, they leave, right? They're going to go to a place, a website that does have a good mobile experience for them. So when you're designing, you can design from the mobile one column, right? Because everything just gets pretty much compressed into one column to a a large the larger desktop experience and the tablet experience. So when you are starting these designs, but again, most of these have really friendly mobile builders. I would say probably like it's much easier to build out like a mobile design in something like a Wix or a Squarespace, where it's like literally you're in mobile view and you just like drag and drop things places. But what that's doing in the background of your code is really gross. So from an SEO perspective, it's probably not great. It's much more confined, and it like much more like you have to do it the right way, or it won't let you do it in something like a Webflow. And then on a WordPress site, oftentimes, unless you're using a builder, you would have to code it. But builders do exist and allow you to kind of build it into a mobile experience, but it's harder on a WordPress site to do. So that is just something I wanted to point out as something that's incredibly important. So when you're looking at these, look at mobile, look at site speed, look at flexibility, look at your own content. The way we tell, a lot of times we work with clients on, and they provide copy. And when we tell them how to build out this copy, think of it kind of like each one of these pages that you're building is a document, right? And you're structuring it. And we'll talk about this more. And I think next week we'll probably just do SEO because I'm referencing it a lot. But you want to think of it as you're building out kind of like an essay where there is a title, right? And then there is a header to a paragraph, and then there is a paragraph, and then maybe there's another header to another paragraph, and then another paragraph, right? So you want to build it kind of like with a hierarchy of what are the important subjects. So for instance, if you're building a website on fruit, right? And you would have like the main title would be like, this is a website about fruit, right? And then within each paragraph header, you might have content like apple, orange, banana, right? And then within each one of those, there might be different types of apples, right? So there's apple, there's gala apples, and then there's, pink lady apples. And then within each one of those, there's paragraph explaining those. So you want to think of it kind of like that, where you're pushing people down this funnel of more and more content, and each content has a specific relevant thing to that type of content. And that's, helps it, with building an SEO friendly website. So I know we jumped around a lot on this conversation. We have about 10 minutes for any questions that you guys have on specific, builders. But, I want to just if you guys do have questions, put them in chat right now. And then I can address as, they come in. But one thing that I just really want to drive home is, you guys potentially are just starting out, and you really want to find a platform that, fits your current need. And if you are trying to just get something up right away, like immediately that's useful for you, look into Wix or look into landing page software that you can just get something up, right? And then, in the background, make that investment in your future to do something a little bit more strategic, like a WordPress site or a Webflow site, or even a custom site if you really want to do it. Uh, you know, if you really have the need to kind of make something that is specific to you as a business, because this is websites are your backbone. There's all these social media platforms that exist, but each one lives on a platform that has many other people on those platforms. A website is your own brand, your own experience, your own data. So you're getting the data on it and like how people are using it. So this is yours. If Facebook decides that Facebook doesn't want to continue on, then all that work that you've put into your Facebook brand, that's gone, right? So with building a website, you're building something that is technically your store. This is where people go to. And all of these social media platforms are kind of just branches of this tree trunk of that is pushing, people back to this website. And once they're there, then that's you. And then you have to give them a good experience so that they do the thing that you want them to do. Every website has a goal, right? What is that goal? Is it, creating to is it getting people to buy things? Is it getting people to contact you? Is it really just getting people to read your content, so that your brand sticks out a little bit more? And these are all just different goals, so you want to think about what that goal is and how you are building your website around that goal. So a question came in, two questions came in. Let's see. One is about stock photography. Since it's hard to meet photographers to, photograph products, do I have any recommendations on stock photography? So there's a lot of stock photography platforms that exist out there. Not all of them are amazing, but there are options. There's usually the way that stock photography works is there's two different business models around stock photography. One is pay per image and one is pay per subscription. Usually the pay per images are much better than the pay per subscription. But if you're looking to get a lot of stock photography really quickly, then you could do pay per subscription. And usually the subscriptions aren't that expensive. A really nice one, if you guys are looking, especially if you go the WordPress route, Envato Elements, this has a suite of different things that are specific to WordPress. You can see here there's graphics, photos, presentation templates, WordPress templates. So if you do decide to go the WordPress route, Envato Elements is a really good, it's a subscription that you can get that has both, stock photography, graphics that you can grab, WordPress templates that you could start from. That's one of our favorites that we use a lot. You can also do, if you're really looking to just, do get like images that you can use, this is a handy tool as well. So you can't just pull images from anywhere on Google because, you're going to end up getting sued from Getty Images, which they will sue literally everybody that they can if you take an image off of Google that is not licensed. or that is licensed. So I'm just going to look at data real quick, right? And I'm going to have to blur out my search history from there if you guys all saw all sorts of fun stuff like coronavirus and Trump. But anyway, go to images. And in this images search here, you can go into tools and you see this little drop down here called usage right. And now you have all these labeled for reuse with modification, labeled for reuse, labeled for non-commercial reuse with modification. And you can select on this, and this will give you a whole array of images that you can use that are labeled for reuse, right? Which is very helpful, you know, for stock photography, just grabbing things really quickly, free images. And then oftentimes these things have, you know, Creative Commons on them, and you can go to the websites that they're coming from, like Pixabay, and you know, grab them from there. And oftentimes they have their own subscriptions as well that you can get. But in general, it can be relatively cheap. You can also find images on like Facebook ads that they'll just give you. So that those are my resources that I could, you know, give you there. And then we have one more question. Just make sure we have good on time here. Yep. Someone starting out on a venture right now, would Squarespace be a happy medium in terms of being able to set up and then an option to scale up? So real quick before we get into that, unsplash.com, which I have also heard, thank you, Jess, is also a really good resource for stock photography. So thanks for chiming in. Again, if you guys have recommendations too, absolutely chime in because I really appreciate it. So yes, Squarespace is a fine platform to start on. Does it have an option to scale up? I'm going to say kind of. You know, you can get relatively far with a Squarespace site. However, you are not going to, if there's a lot of competition in your like field, it's going to be relatively hard to rank with, from an SEO perspective, with a Squarespace website. They give you some basic tools to you know, do SEO, like titles and meta titles and meta descriptions, like you can do all that. But from a, you know, like Squarespace's backbone, you're still relying on an open source, a closed source platform for the most part. There's not a lot of plugins that exist, so you can't do a lot of like super duper customizations. And also from like a bulkiness perspective, it's relatively bulky. So I would say like it's a good starting out point for a venture to do something like a Squarespace, because you can put it together yourself. I, you know, started when before I owned a business, I had a small theater group that I owned, and my first site was a Squarespace site, and it was fine. It got something up. It got the ability to have people donate to us, to get tickets through, you know, so I, you know, was able to use it for a good 2 years before I decided that I wanted to scale it up beyond what the capabilities of Squarespace could do. And I moved and I invested in building a WordPress site. So the answer to that is, I think that you definitely have, with either a Wix or a Squarespace, a means to use it for social media, use it to push people to the site and, you know, get business flowing. But then in terms of trying to rank on Google and like really scale it up to customize it further, you know, you're going to hit a breaking point at some point, which you'll have to go more customized. But at least you'll have some money coming in to help, you know, invest in that. So the next question is, I mentioned an SEO geared webinar next week. When will that be held? All of our meetings or webinars are held on Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So that is when I would be doing that. And I will do for next week an intro on search engine optimization and talk about the different elements that make up a good SEO website. Okay, so I think that brings us right up to about an hour. Again, thank you guys all for joining. I hope you found it educational. I know we jumped around a lot, but I will provide all of you guys this on a in an email. It'll be on YouTube sometime next week, and then I hope you guys join for my next course on SEO, and you can find that in the same exact link that you use to register for this one. So thank you guys, and I appreciate everybody's time, and I hope this is useful. Cheers, guys.